Hi, and welcome back to KANDID with Lady T podcast. This is a podcast where I dive into many topics and issues relating to faith, relationships, life, politics, pop culture, and so much more. Now, just going to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. Today's episode is going to be quite a touchy, sensitive subject. So at any point that you do feel that you can't listen anymore, please do feel free to put this episode on pause and then come back to it another time. But right at the end, I'm going to give places and details on who you can contact if you need to talk to anybody regarding today's subject. So on this episode, we are talking about miscarriages. It's something that a lot of women go through, and it's a very difficult process for a woman when they lose a child. Now, a miscarriage is described as a spontaneous abortion or is an event that results in the loss of a fetus before 20 weeks of pregnancy. It typically happens during the first trimester or first 3 months of the pregnancy. Miscarriages can happen for a variety of medical reasons, many of which aren't within a person's control. Now, typically, we hear women talking about their experiences of miscarriages, but we don't typically hear from men and how they feel and their emotions and what they went through and how they coped with it. And in the same breath, trying to help other, fathers in the same position. Now, my guest today is Donald Mbeutcha, who is a trustee for Beyond Equality. He's an activist within the Black community for men and women. Trust me, he has a lot to say. And most importantly, one of the best titles he has is he's a proud father of 5. Welcome, Donald.
Thank you. You forgot the part where I told you to say I'm tall, dark, and handsome.
Why are you like this?
Explicitly said. No, I'm only joking. No, I'm good. Look, thank you for having me, Lady T. I'm sorry. I start off on a joke. By the way, look, Lady T is making money because look at the background. Look at the sofa. Listen, Asha, let me let's leave you.
I'm trying to for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you'll see what you'll see what he's talking about if you just log on to YouTube, Lady T official, and check it out. But if you're listening, hey, it's a beautiful background. It's a great one for sure. Anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on this episode. This is one topic that I've always wanted to talk about, and I know that we talk to women about this. Women always give their perspective and their experiences, but I know deep down for me, I've always wanted to speak to men about their experiences because they're both in this. It affects the women quite highly, but then we've also got to look at the other person who's involved as well, especially when when the husband or the partner is very present, is very involved, and how are they going through it? What are they feeling? What's their experiences like? What did the whole thing make them go through? Like, were there any tendencies to want to end things? Because there's so many things that can happen, for a man and a woman, but for a man, like, what is their experience of miscarriage, or having not been able to see their child live a long fulfilled life, but only get to see them within a few seconds and then having to say goodbye again? Because I can't imagine that feeling a woman goes through, or even a man goes through, when at the thought of losing a child. So I'm really happy that I get to speak to you about this, because I know you've got a lot to say about it, and I know there's not going to be any no holds barred. You're literally gonna go all in and whatnot. So let's talk about your experience and how this happened for you. So you as I introduced you, you said that you're a proud father of 5. But I know that within that, you class one of your children that didn't make it as a child still. You're still the proud father of 5. So let's talk about from the time when you knew that you were pregnant, because this is essentially baby number 4, right?
Yeah. So again, it's one of those topics that at the beginning was very difficult to talk about,
Mm.
but as time has gone on, it's become easier, and it's it's a stark reminder of how fragile life is every day. Um, I remember when we found out we were pregnant with baby number four. Um, we were ecstatic, like any parent. We're Christians, we're Catholics, and the minute you get involved with sex and you get intimate, you
Mhm.
have to be open to life. And I think I'll come back to that hopefully and touch upon how society views sex. And
Yeah.
and one thing I will say on it now is, if you look at every advert, it talks about how to protect yourself whilst having sex, but doesn't talk about the value of it. Right? I'll let that sit and marinate with people who are listening for a
Real.
minute. When we come back to it, we'll hopefully talk around that. So we obviously, you know, having been in a loving marriage, and you know, we having adult time,
Hmm.
right?
Obviously. Yeah.
We're having sex, simple, and we are open to life, and baby number four is conceived, ecstatic like any parent, planned or unplanned. um it's a gift from God as
Mhm.
far as we're concerned. So, you know, you hear often of couples who have sex multiple times and they're not able to conceive, and unfortunately, for one reason or another, medical or otherwise. So, we're ecstatic that we're having another baby. We love the joy of having a child, and yeah, we set on the journey of, right, we've been through this three times already, so we know what we're doing pretty much. It's time to pull out, you know, the old pram, to pull out the kind of carry carts, to pull out clothes and start sorting through who's gonna wear what. The hand me downs are there, what we've saved, and the Moses basket. I told her to get rid of 20 times, and she was like, "Why don't we have another baby?" Now we're having that other baby, so it's kind of like, wait, she knew what she was doing.
Clearly, yeah, to keep all that stuff, like, of course.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
for me, I'm the kind of guy, I'm like, dash it. We got no space. Get rid of it. We'll find have another
That's
baby.
that's typical guy. That's typical guy attitude.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
we're not gonna need it again. It's okay. No, no, no. Forget it. Forget it. We
Yeah.
need like, and
Bunda hoarding, man. I'm not on that. Like, forget it. We got like space. I'm all about space. Um. Anyway, so we then set on this path for having another child. We're now thinking in the future about what we do next, buying a new house and all the rest of it. So what then happens? My wife had a hernia that was hurting her, and she'd had a hernia with all our children really, so we didn't think much of it. Operation just before we found out that she was pregnant, and now she's pregnant. She can't have the hernia operation. So um, I remember that day we you know, go about, you know, you start looking at the apps as your child is now the size of a bag of sugar and weighs the size of a bag of sugar in your stomach, or your child is now shaped like a bean, or has this and this is growing today, or that's growing today. So you're excited and doing stuff that parents do, or you know, parents to a newborn or potential newborn. Um, and then that day, that Friday, I went to work and I worked at King's Cross. And before I left, my mother-in-law used to come and help us quite a bit with the other kids when I was at work, and my wife was also working part-time. Um, and on that day, she'd had a conversation with her mum the night before, I think. This was, I didn't know any of this till after, about her mum going back home because her mum had been there for a few days and all the rest of it, and she wasn't feeling great. But her mum was like, "Okay, cool, I'll go back home if you think you can manage." So she went, and then that morning I went to work. She was saying, "Oh, her hernia is really hurting her," and I said, "Okay, well, do you want me to stay?" And she was like, "No, no, it'll get better. If it gets worse throughout the day, I'll call you and you can come home." So I've gone. Her mother-in-law has left the night before. I've gone to work. She's at home with the other three kids, and her hernia just gets progressively worse throughout the day. Um, and around 2 o'clock or so, she had a midwife appointment later on that afternoon around 5ish, half 4, 5. So I said, look, your hernia's hurting. I'm going to leave work. Right. So I just got up and left work because I just knew that I had to be home.
Mm.
So got home just in time for her going, her hernia has subsided, the pain has subsided a little bit, and just in time for her to go to her midwife appointment. So and I just, as we do, and as I like doing, is throw the whole tribe in the car and we go. And she's like, no, they're going to make noise. The kids are going to get to the midwife and start picking this up and throwing this and distracting and all the rest of it. But me, I like trouble like this. I just put all the kids in the car and I say, let's go, whatever. Um, so we get there and they do all their checks and she can't find a heartbeat. And we're kind of like, huh? She's like, yeah, sometimes it's normal. Baby just tries to hide or whatever else, and the midwife says, well, I can't find. I'll get another midwife. She tries 2 or 3 times and says, I still can't find it. But this is quite normal. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you hear it, sometimes you don't. And if anyone's ever heard the heartbeat of a child of a child in the stomach, it's like a galloping horse. Right?
Mm.
It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
so she can't hear it. So at this point, my wife and I are quite panicked. She gets another midwife to come in and give it a go. And the midwife says to us, look, sometimes we find it, sometimes we don't. If you want, you can go home and then at your next midwife appointment, which is in more than a few weeks' time, we'll see if we can find it then. Sometimes babies just try and hide.
Mm.
Or if you're really that concerned, we can send you to hospital
Mhm.
for the doctors to do an ultrasound and find out heartbeat. We're like, yeah, obviously. In my mind, I'm already thinking the worst. And at this point, we're panicked. We just don't know. We're thinking the worst. You think the worst straight away. Most people just go, right, okay, I've got to prepare myself for the worst, really. But there's a part of you that just thinks, well, it's not the worst. You
Mm.
know, I'm not that. We're not that couple, and this stuff doesn't happen to us, right? And everyone thinks that to a certain extent with various things. And we go to the hospital. They then do the ultrasound, get a second opinion, and then the doctor comes in and says, "Look, unfortunately, it seems your baby has died."
Whoa. And how many weeks was this?
20 weeks.
Wow.
So, and I actually wanted to made a note to kind of mention about what you were saying earlier on. Is you're right in that in prior to at the 20-week mark is still considered a miscarriage. After the 20-week mark is called a stillbirth.
Right.
So
Okay.
there's two different differentiators there. One gets recognized by the hospital when you can have a birth certificate and all the rest of it. The
Right.
other you don't. Right. The when you have a miscarriage, you don't have a birth certificate. You don't have any of the things that you would. It doesn't get recognized, at least in the NHS, as a child.
Why is
So,
that?
um,
I
I
mean, if
don't
you know that is, I mean, that's if you know if there's a reason for that, because
no,
that's
no,
really
no,
interesting
no.
for me. I've never knew that.
No, I don't know. I don't know why. And it can be quite hard for parents to take because
Mhm.
what then transpired with us, for example, was my wife still had to go and deliver this baby 2 or 3 days later.
Gosh.
You're given the option to take a tablet that will induce labor, and then you come back a couple of days later and kind of you go through the labor pains and kind of deliver this baby that you know full well has died. Um, and the hospital we're at were fairly good, and kind of put the baby in this kind of cold cot, essentially, which is a walk-in mortuary, essentially. Dress the baby and all the rest of it, and um, yeah, that period was very tough, because, like I said. you don't have, apart from a memory box with like the baby's maybe little hat, little
Mm.
socks, things like that, you don't have a birth certificate or death certificate. But if our daughter was just 1 week, had died a week uh,
Later.
later, then she would have got a death certificate and a birth certificate.
Mm.
You know, it makes it tougher to take at that stage because you're kind of, but you're not even thinking about all of that at that stage. You're kind of thinking, right, how do we get through the next, how many ever, you know, period of time you need to grieve.
Mm.
They then asked us the option to do an autopsy on our baby to figure out what went wrong.
Mhm.
We spent some time with her, a few hours with her. We were told at the time it was a boy, and we named him Angelo, um, as in an angel. Um, but then after the autopsy, some months later, and we find out it was a girl. So it was a mess up completely. So,
How
and
did
what
it get that wrong? Like, I don't understand. Is it what at what week do you find out the sex of the baby? Like, typically,
I think they, I think it's at 3 months you can find
right.
out that's a baby. But I think what happened is that they hadn't done the proper medical examination at that stage and just said, look, it was a boy. Because look, they just went with what they could see. So us not being none the wiser, we're like, cool. I mean, when the baby comes out, I haven't still till now. This was back in 2018. I still haven't found it in me to share the picture of our baby um, with anyone.
Mm.
Um, and our baby was formed, fully formed. She looked like her sister,
Wow.
like fully formed. It was at that stage, the baby's fully formed, and it's just a case of the baby putting on weight and growing.
Mm. Mm.
Um, yeah, it was. She, you could clearly, you could see her face, you could see her fingernails, you could see her hands, you could see her eyelashes, her mouth, her nose, everything.
Wow.
So yeah, that was almost like another added dimension to the grieving and starting the grieving process again when we were told it was a girl, because my daughter is the only girl and we've got three boys,
Hmm.
and she's always wanted a sister, and my wife always wanted another girl, so that kind of just added more and more to it. Um, for me, it drove me to kind of go a bit nuts and realize that I wanted to take, I wanted to be close to my daughter. I wanted to take my own life, right? I had suicidal thoughts, not even thoughts, actions where I waited um, till when the family were out, wrote them a note, got a bottle of bleach, bottle of whiskey, blade, all the rest of it, ran a bath, sat in the bath, and I just cried my eyes out. Um, and yeah, it reduced me, and all the whilst the conversation was not being had, or support wasn't being provided, or space wasn't being made for me to have that conversation of how do I feel. It was almost, people will take a step away from you because they don't want to have that difficult conversation and ask you how you are. And people will use the we use the fact that they don't know what to say or what to do to stay away from you.
Mhm.
um and it's almost that taboo and that elephant in the room. Every time you meet someone, they almost never want to ask how are you, so they go on to something completely else. Or if they ask how are you, it's a very unsincere or insincere how are you.
Yeah, it's just, oh, hey, what's good? Not really
Yeah,
like taking the
yeah.
time out to care. Like, how are you? Really, really, how are you?
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
So was there more focus on seeing how your wife was, like how she was, and not necessarily any attention on you or to ask how you were doing?
Yeah, that definitely was. I think um, even when we were in the hospital, it was all about her. It was all about, rightfully so, by the way,
Yeah.
rightfully so. It was all about how can we help you process this? And when, even after that, when the midwife came home, it was all her. She wanted to talk to her about how she's feeling. Never at one point did they say, we want to talk to you and how you're feeling. You look at the kind of help book that they give you in this amazing charity called Sands. Um, we were given a handbook of Sands, and I remember at the time, I've now since then got in touch and worked with Sands on a number of various projects, but at the time I got given this book, this packet that just says babe, parents who are grieving and all the rest of it, and not once did I see a picture of a black man, and let alone a man
Man.
in the book, right?
Mhm.
So I'm like, this is not for me. Maybe I'll give him a call, maybe I don't, whatever. And then just was just left to my own devices, really. I was fortunate enough to fall um, on a group of men who wanted to listen to me,
Mm.
wanted to support me. Some of them had been through a very similar experience. And essentially, they saved my life because God knows what I would have done. Um,
Which kind of like leads me to the question, at that point when you were in your bathroom, you had everything set up, you'd done the note. What stopped you?
Bottle. I just didn't have the courage. And I think it sounds such a weird thing to say. I think I did not once think about my family. I didn't think about the people I was leaving behind, but I just didn't have the courage to go through with it. And it just made me sad and weakened that I don't even have the courage to do that,
Mm.
and it's now when I look back on it, it's more a case of, for me, a plea and a shout for help
Mm.
more than it is about you, and more than it is about the action you're about to do. It's more of a case of no one is listening to me, no one wants to talk to me, no one's talking to me about it, no one's listening to my emotion, to how I feel, no one understands how I feel, so I'm better off not being here.
And I think and I think it's valid because stuff like that it is a cry for help. It is a cry for wanting to talk or take notice of me. Like, I'm hurting too, you know. There are other people's hurting, but I want you to take note of my hurt. Talk to
Mm.
me about what I need to talk, what's going on with me. So at the moment that you've kind of not gone through with it, that same day, what happened? Did you tell your wife what had happened or what you
No,
were about to do?
no, I didn't tell my wife. I didn't actually. Some of the details my wife still found out even this year, and this was like 3 years ago. I never told my wife. The first time my wife found out was maybe about a year and a half on. I never had the courage to tell her because it's such a dark time, and I wasn't hiding it from her, but at the same time,
How could you tell her that this is what I was about to do? I
yeah,
was about to leave.
that would break her. That
Mm.
would break her because and it did break her when I told her I wanted to check like what had happened and where I was, and now I'm in a better place with counseling and all the rest of it. It was kind of, I could see the pain in her eyes, the worry in her eyes for my mental well-being, and the fact that my wife was going through something as well.
Mhm.
But you and I know my wife, and she's one of the strongest people I know.
She is, yeah.
She gets up and just gets on with it.
Mm.
Like I tell you, my wife literally the day after she gave birth to our dead daughter was up the next morning and being like, right, let's go, kids. We're going to this play group today. And I was like,
But do you think that was a coping mechanism for her to be able to deal with to deal with her grief, like for her?
Maybe, but also I know my wife is the kind of, she doesn't dwell on things.
Mm,
It's not necessarily a coping mechanism. Is she? We've got three other children. They're not gonna sit there and wallow in our own self pity.
mm,
They are just kind of, look, we still need to be fed. We still need to be stimulated, like in our minds. We still need play groups. We still need to go to sleep. We still need our nappies changed and all the rest of it. Whereas I didn't. I wanted nothing to do with my children at that time. I
wow.
was like, stay away from me. I don't even want to see you. I want to be in a dark room left alone.
How long did that go on for?
3 weeks,
Wow.
2.5, 3 weeks, yeah. And like I said, it's a huge cry for help,
Mm,
but not being able to vocalize it and not knowing where you can turn to vocalize it. And
mhm,
it's something that society tells us that talk about everything else, but the minute you start talking about how you feel, whoa,
you don't
you're
need to.
going too far,
Yeah.
you know. And I said this the other day to someone. I said, the system that's been set up, the patriarchal system that's been set up, is for those that talk less about the emotion, who are authentically man, and more for those who are males. And I always make the distinction between male versus man. And a male, for those who haven't maybe heard this, is someone who lives in servitude of himself. And a man is someone who lives in servitude of others. The idea is you're born male and you grow into manhood.
Wow.
It's it's a process. It's not a, today you're male, tomorrow you're man. No. Now, what society does is society works to serve the male and ignore the man.
Mm,
The system of patriarchy that has been set up to serve the male. I want, I want, I want. Now, the minute we talk about the we want in society, especially as men, it's not a conversation that others want to have, because the we want takes away from the I want.
yeah.
So I don't want to delve too much into that whole kind of
Yeah,
masculinity.
because that's a whole nother topic for another time, which I think we will just I think me and you will definitely um dive into at some point. But so in terms of your grieving process, like how are your kids in this? Okay, because let's talk about the kids for a second before we come back to you. How are your kids during this time, and how did you tell them that that the sister that they were looking forward to is not going to be around anymore? Like, how do you deliver bad news to a child, and how do you then help them with that grief process?
Right, you have to remember I said we always go everywhere with our tribe. Now it has its bonuses and it has its bad points. One of the bonuses in this instant is they knew just as we were finding out, because they were with us. So it was almost breaching the conversation around death,
Mm,
right, live, essentially having that conversation with them around the concept of someone dying,
mm,
and her not being present. And they took it very well. I think my
mm,
daughter cried. She was sad. My son was sad. The youngest one was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I just want to play. Um, but the other two, they got it and they explained it to the younger one when he was of age to be able to understand, to the point where every year around our daughter's birth date, they want to celebrate it as her birthday. They will get,
wow.
my daughter would get the cake ready. She would decorate the house. She'd be like, "What we doing for Angela's birthday? What, like, how we celebrating it?" So she's not forgotten in our home, and our children understood that comes. I mean, my daughter was 4 at the time,
Mm,
and my son was 3. The youngest one was in Goo Gaga state, so he was still like one or something like that. And yeah, they understood it perfectly. And to this day, we've made a conscious effort to make sure Angelos are part of our daily life and our family, and
Mm.
recognize some of the things that we do. And and someone put it this way for us: you've got a child in heaven, a face you can recognize when you get up there.
Hmm.
And with me and the children is a conversation that we constantly having around what is she doing.
Yeah.
My daughter often says she wants to die so that she can just go and hang out with her sister,
Woof.
but it's kind of like, well, okay, like I know what you're trying to say, but
But
that's
not
what
quite yet.
you.
Not yet.
So yeah, I think the kids have been great. The kids have been, it's forced us to introduce the concept of death straight away. Um, but it's also forced us to make sure, we're very different in how we parent our children, in the sense that we're trying to bring up adults,
Yeah.
essentially contributing adults to society. And we're just guardians and custodians for them for the time being, till and shaping and letting them know what is possible, right, rather than what's not possible.
Mhm.
So they can always ask questions and they have the freedom to do that. And they'll always get as honest answers from us as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think they probably got it better than some adults I know got it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. They have, they really have. Kids are an amazing, the way they deal with
Mm,
things at such a young age is just phenomenal. Like, and it almost gives you that kind of comfort, like, wow, okay, they've taken it this way. I guess because of the nature of their age at that time. And it almost kind of gives you like, okay, they can deal with it. So I need to try and do the same thing. So I need to be strong. As strong
yeah,
as they are, I need to be strong for them as well. So
yeah.
they can go. So now that you kids know, where did your help then come? Like, when did you decide to start seeking help? Because obviously you said that, you weren't, nobody really paid attention to you, nobody really asked how you were, um which I guess would make the grieving process a lot longer and a lot harder. And obviously you contemplated, suicide because that was where you were feeling. So after you didn't, and weeks went on, when did you decide to seek help?
I think a friend of mine was involved with a group of men, and got in touch just out of the blue and said, "Look, hey, I have had kind of heard murmurings of what you're going through. I think this group is really important."
Mhm.
And it went from there. Really, it was almost by God's grace, and some people will know it as whatever they want to know, but I know it as God. Um, that he intervened and kind of directed me to this group of men who I was able to form a friendship, a bond with, who'd been through a very similar thing, and made me realize that actually I'm not alone. There are a lot of other men that go through the same thing, and we often hear the stat that um, 1 in 3 women go through, stillbirth or miscarriage,
Mm.
right? That also means that 1 in 3 men are going through it, right? Um, and there are there's such a huge group of men that go through it and never want to talk about it, never want to discuss it, never want to make it seem like they're going through something, and never want to seem what society knows as weak, right? So, at that point, when I got, I got into this group of men, there were men there who were open about what they've been through, open about their experiences, where they were emotionally,
Mm.
um, how they got out of it, and encourage counseling. So I took on counseling once a week. Um, and yeah, went from there, from strength to strength.
Mm.
Um, Over a period of time, I kind of realized, where I was, who I was, why I was feeling this way. where it stems from, aside from my daughter, where my low self-esteem and wanting, not thinking people want to talk to me about how I'm feeling, to just being like, you know, at times there can be an over reliance on people to talk to and
Mm,
listen to you.
mm.
But we forget, as humans, we can also, the process starts by self-healing,
Yep.
self-acceptance, self-healing, and then growing on from that process. um so yeah, that's when I think I started making inroads and strides to getting better mental health, better physical health. um and yeah, and just and talking about it on a more regular basis. And I made a promise to my daughter at that stage that I'm not going to let her, this experience and her death, to be in vain. I'm going to make sure that I can impact as many lives, as many people as I can, and talk to as many dads as I can, to talk to as many young men
Hmm.
as I can who will potentially experience it, and young women as well who potentially experience this at some stage, until we can get to the bottom why, especially in the Black community, 1 in 3 fathers and mothers are having to suffer the loss of a child.
Mm. Which is quite it's quite scary. That is that is a number, you know. And there's something that you said about a danger. Like, what are the obviously you've been through one of them, but what are the dangers of men not talking about their talking about the, I guess, the experience of childbirth, of miscarriage, or even child stillbirth as well, because that's still all, that's an ordeal that they still have to go through. You know, you see your baby, like you did, form so much, and you know, this living, breathing, you know, beautiful human being, and there's just no life in them. So what are the dangers of men not speaking about their experiences, and what does society need to do, or you know, women as well have to do, in order to also make sure that men speak about this, to go through that process?
How much time have you got, Oga? Because um, so men,
We'll talk
this,
about the dangers first. Let's talk about the dangers.
yeah, I think if I break that question down and kind of think the dangers of men not speaking, and is, brings us to where we are now as a society. It
Mm,
brings us to the high suicide rates in men that we have. It brings us to men that behave in a way that is not with love, empathy, or care, or clarity in any way. We have men that are very unbalanced. We, let's not get this, twisted in any way. We live in a patriarchy,
yeah.
and no one can tell us otherwise. So we need balanced men. We need men that are good leaders. And when I say a good leader, I mean someone that is balanced in their thinking, not someone that is a that is leaning one way or the other, but
Hmm.
someone that's very straight down the middle and can think clearly for both parties, for looking. And remember, my definition of manhood is someone that is lives in service of others. We are not going to get men who live in service of others if they have a lot of this emotional battles that are going on and don't know how to deal with it themselves. Because what's going to end up happening is the repercussions of those emotional battles will be taken out on those respondents that they're supposed to be leading in an unfair way.
Mm.
So the whole idea that what men need, and the outcomes of them not getting it, is one that needs to be first and foremost understood and broken down by men themselves. Is what we are, so we're individuals and we will need different things, but at the core of it, we need us as men to listen to men, to stop using, and I alluded to earlier on, we men want to celebrate toxic masculinity. And the reason, and it's become such a buzzword, the reason why we want to celebrate that is because it's what benefits us. We're not interested, men are not, of this day and age, are not interested in breaking that down, in
Mm.
taking that away because it benefits us. Is, in essence, it's like racism, right? Is the people who benefit from it are not interested in breaking down the structures, because if they break down the structures, they will stop benefiting from it, right? Men benefit from, being on the boards of a lot of companies. For
Mm.
example, if you look at institutional racism,
Yeah.
why in God's green earth are they going to want to break that down if they essentially going to benefit from it in the long run?
It's serving
So
oh, isn't it? That it's serving their
exactly.
needs. It's serving their needs.
Exactly. So first and foremost, when we say what are the outcomes of men not talking, is these are the outcomes of men not talking. We will carry on living in a wrong patriarchal society where those men that try to do the right things will be looked on as dinosaurs and will become very extinct. And secondly, we're going to get young males who are going to grow up without understanding that there is a process to manhood. There is an understanding and a caring to manhood. You just have to look at, again, I'm talking very generally here. You just have to look at a single mother, for example, who, when her child gets to 14, tells her child, "You are now the man of the house," right? But you haven't given him the tools to be the man of the house.
Mm.
One minute you're telling him he's the man of the house, and the next minute you're sending him to bed at 10 o'clock, right? That's hella confusing for a 14-year-old. Which part of that is teaching him this is what manhood looks like? Where is the positive role model that he has in his life to teach him how to be a man? Right, and to be a man, when I say be a man, I'm not talking about the archetypal man that society portrays of a strong, fit, being able to be decisive and go out to work and feed his family. No, I'm talking about a man who is emotionally available, it's
Mm.
very clear in his thought processes, and it's very empathetic.